Bonjour, mon ami, and welcome to another physio-psych lesson in the best possible timeline. Last week we went over the different parts of a neuron, and in this week's episode we're going to talk about something called synaptic transmission. Synaptic transmission happens right here where one neuron meets another and they communicate via neurotransmitters. And that is what this video is going to be about. Thank you as always for joining me, and I hope you enjoyed this lesson. Hello and welcome to another physio-psych lecture in our best possible timeline. Today's lecture is going to be about what happens right here in the space between neurons, this little area called the synaptic gap, where the terminal button of one neuron communicates to the dendrites of another neuron, stimulating a potential action potential. This is how all the neurons in your body more or less work. This is your basic neuron. Things get a little bit more nuanced and complicated depending on what type of neuron we're talking about, but in general, this is how neurons communicate, how they talk. It's how you receive information. It's how you exert voluntary movement, and also how automatic involuntary processes like breathing and heart rate occur as well. So in the last video we talked about the neuron in general, and now we're going to zoom into this area right here, the synaptic gap, and talk about a process known as synaptic transmission. Synaptic transmission. Let's get a fun gold pen. So this is our terminal button, and this is the dendrite on the receiving neuron. So this neuron that's going to be potentially pumping neurotransmitters into the synaptic gap is called the presynaptic neuron. And this one right here, that's going to be receiving the potential stimulation via neurotransmitters, is called the postsynaptic neuron. Alright, with our neurons labeled, we're going to start talking about the space in between neurons. Technically, neurons do not touch, but the space in between them is much, much smaller than the width of a hair. So this is the synapse, this whole area, and this area in between the presynaptic and postsynaptic neurons is known as the synaptic gap. Sometimes it's also called the synaptic cleft. Okay, so how do neurons talk? Remember in our last video that if the action potential is realized, it's going to travel down from the dendrite through the soma, through the axon to the terminal button. Now, once it gets to the terminal button, it's going to trigger the release of neurotransmitters. Neurotransmitters are chemical messengers that are stored in something called the vesicles. So we're going to draw some vesicles. And each vesicle can contain thousands of neurotransmitters. Let's see, we'll make our neurotransmitters teal. Now I'm going to make these neurotransmitters different colors, which is really going to, what am I trying to say? It's going to represent the different shapes that these take, because each neurotransmitter is going to have a receptor site that it's capable of binding to on the postsynaptic neuron. And these receptor sites are specific to the neurotransmitter of their choice. But I don't have the art skills to be drawing different types of neurons, at least not quickly, different shapes, so they're just going to be represented here, illustrated by the different colors. So we're going to say that the pink neurotransmitters can only bind to the pink receptor sites, and that the teal neurotransmitters can only bind to the teal receptor sites, and that the teal neurotransmitters fit into the teal receptor sites like a lock and key, and the pink ones fit like a lock and key. So if a pink one tries to go here, it's not going to work. Do you get what I'm saying? Alright, so let's fill our other vesicles with neurotransmitters. Let's say that these are neurotransmitters located in the nucleus accumbens. So that's the reward center of the brain. These are feel-good neurotransmitters. Maybe, here, hold on, we're gonna need one. Well, we'll do that in a minute. Maybe we'll say that the teal ones are dopamine. And that the pink ones are serotonin. These are two feel-good neurotransmitters. Other feel-good neurotransmitters are norepinephrine is a good example. Oxytocin, vasopressin can be, but we're going to go with these for this. So once that action potential reaches the terminal button, it's going to trigger vesicles to merge with the cell membrane of the presynaptic neuron. And when they merge with the presynaptic neuron, the membrane there, they're going to start releasing neurotransmitters neurotransmitters. Some of them are going to bind to receptor sites on the postsynaptic membrane, and some of them are going to just kind of dissipate in a process called diffusion, and they're just gonna go out into the ether. Now there's a couple other things that can happen here with these neurotransmitters that are in the synaptic gap. The presynaptic neuron also has this mechanism called a reuptake pump, and the reuptake pump moves like a little windmill, and it's just gonna pick up neurotransmitters and push them back into the presynaptic neuron, where eventually they will get recycled and put into a new vesicle. So these guys floating around in here. There's other mechanisms too by which they dissipate, and one of them is enzymes. Let's say these enzymes look like little scissors. This will be interesting. And these little scissors will just cut these guys in half, rendering them useless because they no longer fit like a lock into a key. So then we just have some like half circles, and these little half circles eventually will get picked up by the reuptake pump. A lot of antidepressants work on these reuptake pumps, right? Like the most popular type of antidepressant, I think, is an SSRI. So that's a selective serotonin reuptake inhibitor. So there's enzymes that will cut these in half and make them useless. The reuptake pump will push them back into the presynaptic neuron, and those are some of the mechanisms of action that you'll find here in the synaptic gap. Okay, so that is the process of synaptic transmission, where one neuron communicates to another neuron using neurotransmitters, these little chemical messengers. Depending on the neurotransmitter, when they bind to the postsynaptic neuron, they can increase or decrease the likelihood of an action potential in this postsynaptic neuron, because some neurotransmitters, like GABA, for example, are inhibitory neurotransmitters, and many of them are excitatory neurotransmitters. So that is a little bit about synaptic transmission. Thank you so much for joining me for today's video on synaptic transmission. Next week we're going to be looking at how neurons respond in the event of addiction, withdrawal, and relapse. So, as always, thank you for joining me. I love you so much. Until next time.